All right, so we basically have three different types of temperature sensors. We have, okay, so I'm gonna spell out the whole number here. We got 0, 280, 130, 026. That is the temperature sensor of the LH2.2 system. And then we have the temperature sensor for the LH2.4 system, which is the one we've got on the B230FK engine that we're working on. And that has the number 0280, 130, 032. And both of these sensors seem to have the same resistance, but I'm not so sure about the connector. So that's why I'm not going to tell you guys that they're interchangeable, because they might not be. They do have different Volvo numbers, so something's changed. It's probably the connector, but the values will be the same. So it's these values that we want to follow. And at minus 10 degrees Celsius, we have a resistance of 8.10 to 10.77 kilo ohms. So that's 1,000. So 8,100 ohms to 10,770 ohms at minus 10 degrees Celsius. At plus 20 degrees Celsius, we have 2,280 ohms to 2,720 ohms. And at plus 80 degrees Celsius, we have 290 to 364 ohms. And it follows this, this graph right here. All right. Then there's also another sensor, which is actually found on the B28 engine, which is this one. This one is called 0280, 130, 028. So it's pretty close, but you see the values completely different. For example, at 20 degrees Celsius, we have 8,500 to 11,500 ohms. So if you have a B230FK and you're measuring at operating temperature, and you're getting a reading around 1,700 to 1,300, you've got the wrong temperature sensor. That's when you got a temperature sensor from a B28 engine. That's the B28E or F with the CIS system. Now we need to move on to the schematics for the car. So let's close this. Actually, we can keep it open because we're gonna reference to this line right here later. Let's put that aside. And then we have, I've done other checks here. That's why it says okay, because I've checked the wires and made sure that they're good. One fact that people seem to forget about these temperature sensors is the fact that there's actually two temperature sensors in one sensor. And there is two sensors on the car. Let's get that one straight first. We have two sensors. We have one in the back and one in the front of the engine. The one in the front of the engine goes to the dial inside of the car. That's the one that tells you, okay, this is the heat of the engine. This is how hot it is. But it doesn't do anything more than that. It just tells you how hot the engine is. And then we have the second one, which is the closest to the firewall. Now this is the engine management temperature sensor. And it actually contains two temperature sensors inside of that temperature sensor. Okay, so we have pin 1 and pin 2 on the temperature sensor. In pin 1, we have the temperature sensor for the engine ECU, the fuel ECU, if you will. And then on pin 2, we have the temperature sensor for the ignition ECU. And we want to check both of these out. So you can measure either on the sensor itself, between pin 1 and the ground, like the casing of the sensor, and see what value you get and make sure that's good. Then you can also measure on pin 2 against the casing, make sure that's the same value. But we're going to measure it all the way. So we're going to actually go to the connector on the engine ECU, or the fuel ECU, and we're going to measure it on pin 13. So we're going to measure between, we're going to disconnect from the ECU, and then we're going to measure in the connector to the ECU, and we're going to take pin number 13 and ground. So that would be this measuring between this point right here and this point right here. If we measure that at 20 degrees Celsius, we should have around 2,280 ohms, somewhere around there. Same thing if we measure on pin number 2 on the ignition ECU. So we're going to try that first. We're going to start with the fuel ECU. So pin number 13 and ground. Going to see what value we'll get there. Then we're going to move on to the ignition ECU, pin number 2, ground, see what we get there. All right, let's start there. All right, so what we're going to start off with is we're going to remove fuse number 1, which is up here, probably out of frame. But we're just going to remove that, place it up here. That'll take away the power to the ECU. So when we take the glove off, there's no risk for damaging the ECU. Obviously, we don't have any panel on here, like the plastic that should be covering this, because this car is a complete shit box and this thing is always broken. And I'm always here fiddling because it never runs right. Anyway, we take the glove off like this, or the connector, and then we're gonna find pin number 13 in this connector right here. Now, how do we find pin number 13 just quickly by glancing at it? Well, you won't, because there's no numbers on here. So what you can do is you can actually snip this zip tie off, unscrew this screw right here, take this cover off, slide it off. You can measure from the back, and from the back you can see the exact number. I think I'm just gonna do that. All right, so we're gonna unscrew this screw right here, snip off the zip tie. We will have numbers here on the side very clearly. We'll take our multimeter, we'll set it to ohms. We're gonna take the black cable here, we're gonna push it against the ground connector, which is on the side here. And then we'll just connect this red one, this red lead, to number 13, and we should get a value. So we got 3,830 ohms. I'm a little bit worried that it's so stuck at 383. Oh, there we go, 384. Let's take a look at the ignition box and see what we get there. All right, so underneath the dash, here we have the steering column, and here is the ignition ECU. So we're gonna measure into this glove right here, and we're gonna do pin number 2 and ground, all right? There we go, nice, quick, easy. Pin number 2, it's a red and black one. Let's see what we get. So 369, pin number 2 on this guy. And we got 389 on the fuel side. Now let's go and measure it straight at the sensor and see what we get there. It is very difficult to film this particular sensor because it's like way in there, but I'm doing my best. We'll see what we get. Disconnecting it. I guess just take ground up here and measure on the right. In here we get 390. And the other one we get 370. So I guess they are differing a little bit. It ain't too bad. Well, that didn't really give me anything. That was, the values were okay. At least now we know that the connection between the sensor and both of the ECUs is good. Now we gotta check out the sensor itself. So what I wanna do is I wanna unscrew it from the engine, and I wanna boil it so we can get it up to like a known temperature of boiling, and then reference that value. I think it should be 0 at boiling point. We'll have to consult the manual, but I think it'll be around there somewhere. All right, so let's do that. Let's get the sensor out and measure it under boiling water. So this temp sensor was actually brand new when I put it on the engine in the series. So I never thought that this was broken. So this got me, I mean, it really threw me off because I assumed that it was working. And you should never do that. We're at 10 degrees right now, Celsius. So we should have a value of about around 3,000 ohms, somewhere around there. And the way we're gonna do this is we're gonna take this temp sensor, we're just gonna put this standard Bosch, I think it's called the EV1 connector, something like that. We're just gonna plug this on here. Now, this came from like the Volvo 960. I usually, if I'm gonna throw something away like a car, I usually cut off all of the connectors because they can come in handy, like right now, or if you're building an aftermarket ECU or whatever, you know, it's always nice to have a connector laying around. Maybe the mice have been chewing on like the rubber sleeves and stuff. It's always nice to have stuff like that laying around. Anyway, we got the connector on here. Since it's a temp sensor, it doesn't really matter, you know, positive or negative or whatever. But one thing you got to keep in mind when you're checking one of these is not to measure across these two, since we have two individual temp sensors inside of this temp sensor. So what you want to do is something like this. That would act as the engine block. So that will be our ground. And then we're going to measure temp sensor 1 and temp sensor 2. Now these should show the same value. Okay, so we have two crocodile clamps right here. I'm just going to plug in the red one. And then we're going to attach the red one to the blue one here. It might be a different color because I'm colorblind, but it should be fine. The bluish one. And we're going to turn this thing on and let's see if we get a value here. All right, so we're getting around 3,136 ohms. So let's check that out again against the charts here. We're currently at 10 degrees. So yeah, we should have around, 3,100 is reasonable. All right. Now let's move this one over to this guy. Now remember, I said they should be the same. But here we have definitely got something going on. 0.063 mega ohms. So that is completely gone. Let's see now, this is the green and white wire, I think, which is pin number 2. Okay, so pin number 2 goes to the ignition ECU. So the ignition ECU was getting the wrong data all the time when I was driving this car. And in the video when we started it and everything, it did not know what the temperature was because it's obviously pretty broken. And that led me down a whole path of crazy fault tracing. So double check your stuff. Even if it's brand new, just start double checking it because it's most likely the problem. That's why you should never fix anything that's not broken. Anyway, we're not going to bother with the sensor. We're not going to boil it or anything because it's obviously broken. So we're not going to spend any more time on it. What we're going to do now is we're going to take the new old sensor from the car and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to measure it up and then we're going to boil it and make sure that it follows this graph right here. So let's do that. All right, so in order to get the temperature sensor out, we're going to have to drain the coolant. I'm going to try to partially drain it today because we need to get some of the coolant out in order to get the sensor out, obviously. And the way I'm going to approach this today is I'm going to use that little, what do you call that? A nipple down on the block there. We're going to put a hose on that thing and then we're going to drain this into this bucket right here. And fingers crossed, I will be able to reuse some of it. It's pretty tricky to get this one out, so you want to have, your shortest 19 that you've got. It's still going to be pretty fiddly. I would actually advise that you unhook the battery for this so you don't short that out against the starter motor, because that is very easily done here. I'm actually going to go ahead and do that because that will definitely happen to me. Let's go and test this one out. This is the real genuine Bosch item. So we have 0, 280, 130, 0, 32. So then we read here, we got 0, 280, 130, 0, 32 for LH 2.4. And LH 2.4 is what we've got on a B230FK. So that is correct. So these are the resistance levels at the temperatures that we're looking for, which means that this whole diagram right here is valid. So we can go ahead and follow this value right here. I've been running the heater in here for like an hour now. It's still 10 degrees. I'm just gonna go ahead and turn this thing off because it's making one hell of a noise. Look how much better this looks like compared to this one. This one's like 5 days old in the engine. And this one's from the 1990s. They didn't sell any Bosch temperature sensors. I don't know why, but I couldn't get a hold of one. Probably wouldn't have bought one anyway because I'm so cheap on this car. All right, so now we can clearly see all the values here. We're aiming for 190 ohms at boiling temperature. And we're gonna make sure that it follows this line right here consistently, or around this line anyway. I'm just gonna go ahead and log it according to this one. So 10, measure 10, 20, 30, so on. This one might be a bit slower than the sensor in here, but we're just gonna have to work with what we got here. So what we don't want is for one of these numbers to just skyrocket one way or the other during the heating process. We want them to smoothly drop down to 190 ohms. That's how we make sure that the sensor is working, all right? So let's get this one going. Look at that, now it's starting to move. 3.8, 17, 18, yeah, it's going up quickly now. 40 degrees. We should be at 1200. Close to it, but not really. Next, we're aiming for 60 degrees. At 60 degrees, we want 600 ohms. 60, 900, 850. So it's a little bit behind, but it's definitely within margin. So it's still okay. So next thing we're aiming for 80 degrees Celsius. And at 80 degrees Celsius, we want high 300s, like 350, 80, somewhere around there. All right, so we're at 80 degrees. And yeah, high 300s. It's a little bit high. It's a little bit high all the time. It should be between 290 and 364. So yeah, I guess it is a little bit off. So now we're up at operating temperature of 90 degrees. We're at 300-ish. So that's pretty much perfect. 260 ohms. It's close to 190, isn't it? But we're not really at boiling, we're at 97. And there we go, 99 degrees. 218, 204. So I would say that is quite all right. It doesn't follow it perfectly, but it is good enough. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna do the same thing, but we're gonna put this thing in the freezer, all right? So let's head on over to the freezer. This is currently at minus 20 degrees, 25 degrees, something like that. It's an old freezer, I don't know if that's correct. Probably not. That says low, so that doesn't give us anything. So that's great, that's gonna be a challenge. We wanna make sure that these get down to about 10,000 ohms. So that's probably gonna take a while to cool it down, but I'm gonna keep the camera rolling here and we'll see where we wind up. This kind of sucks that we don't have anything to reference it by. I'm gonna see if I have a manual thermometer somewhere. Found this old windmill that I had laying around, but it does have one of those old mercury, I guess that's not mercury. It measures temperature. Whoa! We're just gonna pop this in here. These keep shutting down, that's a bit annoying. Sorry about that. All right, so it kind of keeps going down there, I see. I'm gonna go ahead and empty out the memory card because it's full. And then we'll come back. All right, so everything has fallen asleep here, obviously. Yeah, 16,000 ohms, 17,000 ohms. Let's see what temperature we're at. That's a bit frosty. I wonder if that's right. I think that's more than -4. So around 16,000. That means we should have a value of about -20 degrees. Yeah, it's hard to say. I wish that this would have gone a little bit lower so that we could have had some kind of reference. Unfortunately, the windmill didn't work in our favor this time. Anyway, I would say that this is fine, which is a bit of a shame because we are having some issues with this car. And I was kind of hoping it was the temp sensor, but it's clearly not because it's not deviating enough for it to cause the kind of problems that we were having. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys for watching, and yeah, I hope to see you guys in the next video. Ha det gött! Bye.